Hello and welcome back to another episode of Biology in Focus. Today we're going to look at Chapter 41, Species Interactions. My name is Mr. Sparks and I'll be taking you through this lecture for John Tyler Community College. Biological community is an assemblage of populations and various species living close enough for potential interaction. So these are like ecosystems or any given area, like a watershed or a particular region that you could define based on a geographic area, like a valley or a mountaintop. These are all examples of biological communities. For example, an interaction between species is the carrier crab, which carries a sea urchin on its back for protection against predators. The carrier crab will fix a sea urchin onto its back. They live in the South Pacific Seas, and when a fish comes to try to attack the carrier crab, it will actually joust with the fish. It'll point the sea urchin in the direction of the fish and try to poke it in the eye and get it to leave. And then so the crab gets a benefit from the sea urchin, but the sea urchin doesn't get a lot of benefit from the crab, although it does get moved around, so it may get moved into new foraging areas that it otherwise would not have been able to explore. Sea urchins move a lot slower than crabs. Okay, our first concept is interactions within a community may help, harm, or have no effect on the species involved. Ecologists call relationships between species in a community interspecific interactions. Examples are competition, predation, herbivory, and symbiosis, which includes parasitism, mutualism, and commensalism, and facilitation, which is kind of what the crab does for the sea urchin. It facilitates its moving around. The interspecific interactions can affect the survival and reproduction of each species, and the effects can be summarized as positive, negative, or no effect. Okay, we're going to use these markers in the description of each of these species interactions. Interspecific competition occurs when species compete for a resource that limits its growth or survival. Okay, so one example of this might be the competition between Homo sapiens and Homo neanderthalensis. They both competed for similar resources across the region where they interacted, and there was a lot of competition between those two different species. Bird species can compete for similar resources, and they wind up in direct interspecific competition. Competitive exclusion is when strong competition that can lead to competitive exclusion. That's the local elimination of a competing species. So one species may be more effective than another at extracting particular resources, and they will cause the other species to leave the area. The competitive exclusion principle states that two species competing for the same limiting resources cannot exist in the same place. But there are ways that two different species can exist in the same area. Of course, evolution is evident in the concept of ecological niche. It's the specific set of biotic and abiotic resources that are used by an organism. An ecological niche can also be thought of as an organism's ecological role. Ecologically similar species can coexist in a community if there are one or more significant differences in their niches. For example, there are two species of peccary, which is like a forest pig, that live in the neotropical forests, that's Central and South America. One is the white-lipped peccary and the other is the collared peccary. And the collared peccary specializes on softer fruits that come from certain trees, and the white-lipped peccary specializes on hard nuts, that it's able to crack those hard nuts in a way that the collared peccary is unable to do. And so these two animals are able to occupy the same space because they have different ecological niches. Resource partitioning is a differentiation of ecological niches, enabling similar species to coexist in a community. So this is like those two species of peccaries. They partition those resources, and that enables them to live in the same community. Here's the example that they give of anolis lizards. There are 7 different species of anolis lizards that live in close proximity to one another in the Dominican Republic, and they all occupy slightly different ecological niches. Here's one, Anolis disticus, which perches on sunny perches, and here's the other, Anolis insulatus, which perches in shady branches. So these two, they occupy nearly the same niche, but they partition their resources in such a way that they can coexist. Now, what's interesting too is that oftentimes many species are able to coexist in the tropical environment because there's a lot of sunlight and a lot of rain, and therefore a lot of plants, and all these different plant species allow for different ecological niches. You know, they attract different insects and so on and so forth. So the case here is that these 7 species of Anolis lizards live in close proximity and all feed on insects and other small arthropods. However, competition for food is reduced because each lizard species has a different preferred perch, thus occupying a distinct niche. So there are more niches available for them. The Anolis lizard, this is the one that people commonly call the chameleon. It's not really a chameleon, but they turn green or brown, and you find them readily in Florida, in the southern. I don't know if they go as far as north as Georgia, but they're pretty common in the southern part of Florida. A species' fundamental niche is the niche that's potentially occupied by that species. So that is it's any location that is the possible potential location of that niche. The species' realized niche is the niche that is actually occupied by that species. So a realized niche is often smaller than the fundamental niche. The fundamental niche could include more areas than the realized niche, but the realized niche often incorporates competing species that prevent the original species' fundamental niche from expanding. As a result of competition, a species' fundamental niche may differ from its realized niche. For example, the presence of one barnacle species limits the realized niche of another species. Here's an example that was done in the 60s by an ecologist named Joseph Connell. He observed that these two barnacle species lived in the similar area on the rocky intertidal shoreline in the Pacific Northwest. And what he did is he removed one species, Balanus, and this allowed Cathalamos to the other species to inhabit its fully realized niche, its fundamental niche. So the fundamental niche of Cathalamos was this whole intertidal zone here, but because of Balanus, it was Balanus outcompeted Cathalamos in the lower region of the niche, and therefore reduced the fundamental niche of Cathalamos, giving it its realized niche of only existing in the high tide zone. So interspecific competition makes the realized niche of Cathalamos much smaller than its fundamental niche. Character displacement is a tendency of characteristics to be more divergent in sympatric populations of two species than in allopatric populations of the same species. An example is given in the beak size between populations of two species of Galapagos finches. So these are two different species of Galapagos finches on two different islands. One island, Los Hermanos, had only Geospinosa or Geospiza fuliginosa, and it had beak dimensions following these parameters. The beak depth here is the metric across the x-axis, and then Geospiza fortis lived on Daphne without any of the other species present, and it also had a similar beak depth in those two among its population. Now, in Santa Maria and San Cristobal, these are islands where those species coexisted together, and they began to divide into separate ecological niches. Geospiza fortis began to have a larger, heavier beak, capable of eating different kinds of seeds, larger, heavier seeds, and Geospiza fuliginosa began to specialize on smaller, lighter seeds. So this you see is niche separation, or resource partitioning of these two different resources here by these two different species, and they became more physically distinct, even though they were the same species as found in these other on these other islands, as determined by other characteristics. So resource partitioning, niche separation, niche differentiation. Right here, these two different species began to develop different characteristics. Predation is a interaction which refers to in which one species preys, the predator kills and eats the other prey. So it's good for the predator, it's bad for the prey. Some feeding adaptations of predators are claws, stingers, and poison. I think we're all familiar with predatory species. Cats and dogs are predators. Deer and pigs are generally prey. They're not entirely defenseless, but they don't have the adaptations necessary for feeding on predators, for feeding on a prey species. Prey display various defensive adaptations. Behavioral defenses include hiding, fleeing, forming herds or schools, and active self-defense. Animals that have morphological and physiological defense adaptations. Cryptic coloration or camouflage makes prey difficult to spot. Okay, here are different types of colorations which point to different types of adaptations as well. The cryptic coloration of the canyon tree frog up here in the top here, it's got a kind of a lumpy, dry brown skin, and it blends in with the roots and leaves that are on the ground in its environment. That's called cryptic coloration or camouflage. Aposematic coloration is when the organism tries to be as conspicuous as possible. Aposematic coloration in this species is the poison dart frog. Now, poison dart frog is it can kill you if you handle it. You have to handle it very carefully. In Central and South America, the native people that live there actually take poison dart frogs like this. There are many different species of them. They take these poison dart frogs and they rub the tip of a blowgun dart on the back of the poison dart frog, and that causes the dart frog to excrete its poison onto the tip of the blow dart, and then you can you can actually with a one single blow dart, if you shoot it at a monkey or another species that you're trying to catch and eat, it will the curare or the poison in the blow dart will paralyze and kill the monkey way up in the trees. So that's an adaptation that humans have developed based on the poison dart frog. Now, there's two other kinds of mimicry that we're going to talk about here. Batesian mimicry, which is when a harmless species mimics a harmful one. Like this is a non-venomous hawkworm larva. It's a caterpillar, and it will actually inflate its head so that it looks like a venomous snake. They say it looks like this venomous green parrot snake, but it doesn't look like that to me. But it does look like a snake head, so it would really startle a bird or a predator that was trying to catch it. And then there's also Mullerian mimicry, in which two unpalatable species mimic each other. There's the cuckoo bee here and the yellow jacket. Both of these have stingers, and this is another form of aposematic coloration. So you have aposematic coloration between these two species, and they are warnings to the predators that they might get stung if they try to eat these prey. Now, sweat bees, which are little harmless bees that fly around in the summertime, they're closer related to flies. They sometimes have this similar color pattern, this yellow and black color pattern, and that would be a type of Batesian mimicry. It's where that harmless species mimics the harmful one. Okay, cryptic coloration or camouflage in the canyon tree frog. This is a great adaptation for prey species. Animals with effective chemical defenses often exhibit bright warning coloration called aposematic coloration. That's the poison dart frog. Predators are particularly cautious in dealing with prey that display such coloration. They may eat one poison they may get sick by eating one of these species, and then in the future they'll no longer trifle with such animals. Aposematic coloration in the poison dart frog. In some cases, a prey species may gain significant protection by mimicking the appearance of another species. In Batesian mimicry, a palatable or harmless species mimics an unpalatable or harmful one. Okay, so that is Batesian mimicry. That's our caterpillar that looks like a snake. The Batesian mimicry is a harmless species mimics a harmful one. Okay, just like those little sweat bees that look like bees, but they're not bees. They just look like them. That's Batesian mimicry. These are the non-venomous hawk moth larvae. What's interesting too is like in some there are like the Polyphemus moth, which is a large moth that has eye spots on its wings. When it rests on a tree, if it hangs upside down, it looks just like an owl, an owl's face. So those eye spots have a kind of a Batesian mimicry function. In Mullerian mimicry, two or more unpalatable species resemble one another. These includes these two different bee species here. It could also include viceroy and monarch butterflies, two different species of butterfly, which if ingested, they can cause violent vomiting in the bird species that eats them. So if that bird eats a monarch or viceroy, it will begin to throw up, and then it will no longer eat that species. It'll be conditioned against eating those species, and they look the same. Those are Mullerian mimics. Okay, herbivory is obviously the where an herbivore eats a plant, or parts of a plant, or all of a plant, or algae. In addition to behavioral adaptations, some herbivores may have chemical sensors or specialized teeth or digestive systems. Plant defenses include chemical toxins and protective structures. Okay, protective structures might include spines, like in cactuses, which are actually highly adapted leaves, or thorns, like you find on the greenbrier or rose tree. These are physical defensive structures. Lots of plants have chemical toxins. Plant toxins are often used in development of various pharmaceutical products. The ability of plants to develop these photosynthates or other compounds is well renowned and useful to human beings. Here's a manatee eating a bunch of weeds. I don't know, they look like Elodia, but I'm not sure what species of plant that is. But the manatee can get between 800 and 1,200 pounds, and they can grow as long as 8 to 10 feet long. So they're an incredibly large and peaceful animal. They're not really aggressive, and they just kind of bump along. Their ecological niche is summarized basically by what they're doing here. They just eat aquatic weeds, and they bump along. You can find these in Florida and in parts of the West Indies, but mostly you're most likely to find them in Florida, where they are protected. One of the biggest problems for manatees in the Florida is on the intracoastal waterway, where they sometimes forage. They can be struck by boats, and boat propellers can really tear up their backs, and it can be a detriment to their health. But they're an interesting animal. The manatee, Trichechus manatus. It is a fascinating organism. If you want to do more research on it, it's quite interesting. Okay, symbiosis is a relationship where two or more species live in direct and intimate contact with one another. It includes parasitism, which is it's positive for the parasite and negative for the host. It generally has some negative impact on the host animal. It's where one organism, the parasite, derives nourishment from another organism, its host, and which is harmed in the process. Parasites live within the body of their hosts and are called endoparasites. So this is like roundworms or tapeworms, which are flatworms, or they could be we could be talking about Giardia or Trypanosoma, or any of these protistan endoparasites. And parasites that live on the external surface of the host are called ectoparasites. So ectoparasites are like ticks and fleas and bed bugs, and for leeches are an ectoparasite. Also, lampreys that suck on the side of fishes, those are ectoparasites. Okay, anything that sticks on the external surface of the body. You probably, everyone here has probably had a tick, or their pets have had fleas. These are ectoparasites. Many parasites have a complex life cycle involving multiple hosts. Schistosomiasis, a type of protist, has a phase where it exists in the snail, and then in the snail it is excreted into the water, and from the water it gets into a human host. So it has like a two-part life cycle. Some parasites change the behavior of the host in a way that increases the parasite's fitness. There's a parasitic fungus that affects ants in Central America, and it causes the ant to climb up into the top of the grasses, up into the highest possible location, and then once it gets there, it kills the ant, and it fruits, the fungus fruits, and then it distributes its spores from the ant. They call it the zombie ant fungus, and it distributes those spores over the other population of ants below. Parasites can significantly affect survival, reproduction, and density of host populations. Okay, so parasites can have a very real impact on host populations. Some like Giardia you can live through Giardia, but you'll definitely be adversely impacted in the meantime. Malaria, which is a type of protist parasite as well. If you get malaria, malaria can kill you, so it can definitely affect you. Mutualistic symbiosis or mutualism, which is beneficial to both species, is an interspecific interaction that benefits both species. In some mutualisms, one species cannot survive without the other. In other mutualisms, both species can survive alone. Mutualisms sometimes involve coevolution of related adaptations in both species. Okay, here are ants of the genus Pseudomyrmex in an acacia tree. The acacia has certain they're not glands. They don't really secrete anything, but they're like at the base of the thorns. They'll have like a little horse. That's a little house that's available for the ants to move into, and the ants move into these little thorn houses, and if anything touches the acacia tree, they'll come out and swarm on the acacia tree. And they also like to crop out the ground surrounding the acacia tree, so the ants keep other plants away from the acacia tree, and this allows the acacia tree to have more sunlight and grow faster. The faster that it grows, the more little thorn houses that it has on its tree, on its limbs, and the more the ant population can grow in that. So that is a mutualistic relationship between the ant and the acacia tree. Ants also live in other species of trees like Cecropia, found in Central and South America. And if you lean up against a Cecropia tree by accident, these ants will come out and swarm just like they do for the acacia tree. So this type of adaptation has been evolved in several different species. Okay, here is a close-up of the ants in their little homes there. Okay, the ants feed on nectar produced by the tree and on protein-rich swellings at the bases of the leaves. Here's the area cleared by ants around the acacia tree. In commensalism, usually one species benefits and the other is neither harmed nor helped. Commensal interactions are hard to document in nature because any close association likely affects both species. Okay, here is a Cape buffalo in probably in South Africa. A possible example of commensalism between cattle egrets and the African buffalo. The Cape buffalo, it's not harmed or it's not benefited by the cattle egrets, but as it walks around in the tall grass, it will stir up all kinds of insects and arthropods, and then the cattle egrets will come in and they will pick off all the insects that are in those grasses. So the buffalo does a job for the egrets, but the egrets don't really do much for the buffalo. There are other species of birds that do benefit large mammals, and particularly in Africa. Birds such as the oxpecker, which is not pictured here. The oxpecker has a gray, brown feathers and a red beak, and it will eat the parasites, the ectoparasites, off of the large mammals like this. I don't know why they didn't include that in this example, but that's a good example of commensalism as well, because I guess it's actually mutualism in that case, because the oxpecker is getting fed and the large mammals getting cleaned. But I'm going way off the reservation with that. Okay, facilitation is either positive or neutral. It's an interaction in which one species has a positive effect on another species without direct or intimate contact. For example, the black rush makes the soil more hospitable for other plant species. Okay, here's a salt marsh with the black rush in the foreground, and it shows that the number of species, plant species here, is greater with the black rush than without the black rush. So that's an example of facilitation. You know, a lot of times this occurs with different types of vegetation, where vegetation is in an area, and like in the northern hardwood forests in the mountains in Virginia, they deposit their leaves in the fall, and that helps build up the soil, and that facilitates the other vegetation in that area. So that could be considered a type of facilitation as well. Now, diversity and trophic structure characterize biological communities. There's two fundamental features of community structure: are species diversity and feeding relationships. Sometimes a few species in a community exert strong control on that community's structure. Species diversity of a community is the variety of organisms that make up the community. It has two components: species richness and relative abundance. Species richness is the number of different species in the community, and relative abundance is the proportion of each species represents in all individuals in the community. We're going to look at these both together as species diversity, or Shannon Species Diversity Index, in the coming pages here. Okay, so here's two examples of species that have the same species richness. They both have the same number of species in there, but they've got different species diversity. Okay, different relative abundance. Okay, so here in Community 1, you would maybe intuitively say that it has greater species diversity. It has a measure that includes both species richness and species abundance. So you would say Community 1 has greater diversity, and Community 2 has lesser diversity because it's got one species that seems to be predominant, even though it has the same number of species here. Here's a pine tree, here's a cedar, I don't know what kind of tree that is, but you know, it's got the same number of species, A, B, C, and D, A, B, C, and D, but it's got them in different amounts. Now, these two communities can have the same species richness, but a different relative abundance. Diversity can be compared by using a diversity index, and the most widely used one is the Shannon Diversity Index, which is H prime, or H equals the species where relative abundance of each species, and then ln is the log of the natural rhythm, the natural logarithm. So basically, what we're looking at is the species. We're going to try to develop an index for species diversity here. We're going to go through this briefly in the coming pages here, but this is going to be the topic of Lab 12, biodiversity. So we're going to go over this in more detail then. Okay, determining the number and relative abundance of species in a community is challenging, especially for small organisms. Molecular tools can be used to help determine microbial diversity. Okay, here's Shannon Diversity Index over soil pH, and you can see that there's optimum soil pH seems to be around 0.7. That's neutral pH, so that's not surprising. This is a really good neutral pH is conducive to a lot of things. It allows for all kinds of it allows for ion flow to occur, and it's more restricted down in the acid range or in the alkali range. So no surprise there. The diversity of sampled bacteria was related almost exclusively to soil pH, with the Shannon Diversity Index being highest in the neutral soils and lowest in the acidic, and also we can infer the alkali soils as well. Ecologists manipulate diversity in experimental communities to study the potential benefits of diversity. For example, plant diversity has been manipulated at Cedar Creek Natural History Area for 2 decades. So this is an ongoing long-term ecological study. And this is in Minnesota. It's been going on for quite a while. The study plots at Cedar Creek Natural History Area, site of a long-term experiments in which researchers have manipulated plant diversity. So each of these different plots in here will have different numbers of species of plants and different types of plants, and it's as you can see, it's a big experiment. It's been going on for a long period of time. Okay, communities with higher biological diversity are more productive and more stable in their productivity. You can think of tropical rainforests are very productive. They produce a lot of wood. They have a lot of animal life, and they're fairly stable in their productivity as compared to the tundra, which is very low diversity, and it doesn't withstand well to types of disturbances. But there, in the tundra region, there aren't many disturbances besides extreme cold anyway. So these communities are able to produce biomass, the total mass of all individuals in a population, more consistently than in single species plots. Okay, so that's like you're going to get like what I was saying about the tropical rainforest. You're going to get greater diversity, gets greater biomass overall. They're better able to withstand and recover from environmental stresses. So when there are droughts or I don't know what other kind of occurrences might happen up in Minnesota, extreme cold maybe, they're able to withstand those and recover from those environmental stresses. They're more resistant to invasive species and organisms that become established outside of their native range. So one way to look at high biological diversity is usually native populations have higher biological diversity than agricultural sites, because agricultural sites usually have like one species, like corn or soybeans or green beans or tobacco. They're all just one single species that has to go over that whole species and that whole area, and then you have to constantly put inputs in there to maintain the growth rate of those populations. In greater biological diversity, you have a system that's more able to take care of itself. Trophic structure is the feeding relationships between organisms in the community. It is a key factor in community dynamics. Food chains link trophic levels from producers to top carnivores. Okay, so here's the food chain. The base of the food chain is always the primary producers, either plants or phytoplanktons. Okay, so these are photosynthesizing organisms. They get their energy directly from the sunlight, and then they transfer that energy to the next level when they are consumed. Primary consumers are herbivores and zooplankton, so it could be grasshoppers or buffalo or deer or various different kinds of zooplankton, which might include the fry, the young of certain fish. These in the terrestrial ecosystem, it might be consumed by shrews or mice are actually primary consumers. They tend to eat plant material directly, seeds in particular, but they are also they also eat insects. So secondary consumers, like in this case, a shrew. The shrew might be eaten by a tertiary consumer. The rattlesnake here, and the rattlesnake could be eaten by a red-tailed hawk. Okay, and similar effects happen on the marine food chain. Here we've got menhaden or other small fish that are eating the zooplankton. They might be eaten by bonito, by mackerel, and mackerel could be eaten by a larger fish. Well, it's not a fish. I can't believe I said that. By the whale, the mammal, the orca, the killer whale could eat these larger fish. Okay, so they're all based on the primary producers, the plants and phytoplankton. A food web is a branching chain with complex interactions. Species may play a role at more than one trophic level in a food web. So a food web is a more realistic example than a food chain. A food chain just kind of shows you basically the direction of the food energy through the system, whereas food web shows you more what's happening on a more direct level, on a more complicated and accurate level. So here's phytoplankton at the base of this food web here. It's being eaten by krill. The krill is being eaten by whales or seals or penguins, other fish, by other carnivorous plankton. Okay, copepods go in the same direction. They may form the base of the food chain for carnivorous plankton, fish, and squid. And squid are eaten by sperm whale and elephant seals. Leopard seals are eating these fish, and they may be eating crabs and other things. These leopard seals could be eaten by smaller toothed whales like the orca, the killer whale, or I'm not sure what else would eat leopard seal. I think it's pretty much orcas, but could also be great white sharks. Okay, so at the top of this food web interaction are human beings. Humans eat whales and elephant seals, and I don't know too many people that eat elephant seals, but basically, I mean, you get the idea. Humans like to be at the top of the food chain or the food web or whatever we're studying. So that gives us an indication there. Arrows follow the transfer of food from producers, the phytoplankton, up through the trophic levels. For simplicity, this diagram omits the decomposers. Obviously, the decomposers are an important part, and they're really at the top of the food web because everything dies, so everything gets decomposed. Certain species have a very large impact on community structure. Such species are highly abundant or play pivotal roles in the community dynamics. Dominant species are those that have the most abundant or have the highest biomass. One hypothesis suggests that dominant species that are most competitive in exploiting resources. Other hypotheses say they are most successful at avoiding predators and diseases. So these are like the most abundant species in a given ecosystem. Keystone species exert strong control on the community by their ecological roles or niches. In contrast to dominant species, they are not necessarily abundant in a community. Field studies of the sea stars illustrate their role as a keystone species in intertidal communities. An example of a keystone species might be jaguars in the neotropical forests in South and Central America. They feed on various prey species like the peccaries that I mentioned earlier, and also the deer and agouti, which is like a smaller rodent that's about the size of a beaver. But they, in controlling these populations of these smaller prey species, they have an effect. Jaguars have an effect on the plant species that grow, because those other species are herbivorous and they feed on the plant species. So if you remove the jaguar from a given habitat, you would see a structural change in the vegetation. Now we'll talk about the sea stars. Okay, so here we have the sea stars, and this is the number of species that are present. And basically what happens is the sea star eats these mussels that grow on the side of the rocks in the intertidal zone. And when the sea star is absent, the mussels grow all over the rocks without any control. So they so when you take the sea star out of that system, biological diversity declines. With the sea star in the system, biological diversity remains high because the sea star is controlling the other species. Okay, there's lots of examples like that of keystone species. Ecosystem engineers or foundation species cause physical changes in the environment that affect the community structure. For example, in beaver dams can transform landscapes on a very large scale. It's really common to consider beavers as ecosystem engineers because they are like engineers. They build dams on creeks and rivers, and they cause that river to become a pond, and in which they build their dams. They're really amazing animals. They can take down a full-size tree if they put their mind to it, and then they'll just nibble on the leaves and the twigs at the top of the tree. A beaver will cut down lots of trees in the vicinity of its beaver dam, of its pond, and it will take those branches from the tops of those trees, and it will guard them away in little areas around the pond, so it'll keep them fresh for the wintertime, and then they'll have food in the wintertime. They're very forward-thinking animals, and they're excellent engineers, and it's no surprise they're known as our ecosystem engineer example. By felling trees and building dams and creating ponds, beavers can create and transform large areas of forest into flooded wetlands. Totally changes when beavers are in an area, it absolutely changes the characteristic of the area. There's two basic models of ecosystem functioning. One is the bottom-up model of community organization. It proposes a unidirectional influence from lower to higher trophic levels. In this case, the presence or absence of mineral nutrients determines the community structure, including the abundance of primary producers. So basically, here's the idea: is that nutrients are the base of the food chain. Where those nutrients are found, it predicts what kind of plants you're going to find. Whatever kind of plants you're going to find is going to predict what type of herbivores you're going to find, and what type of herbivores are there is going to predict what kind of predators that you find in that area. So the bottom-up model looks like this: N to V to H to P, and the top-down model is basically looks the opposite of that. We'll cover that shortly here. Okay, so in this case, the presence or absence of mineral nutrients controls the plant numbers, and V, and controls the herbivore numbers, H, which in turn controls the predator numbers. The simplified this is the simplified population bottom-up model. The top-down model, also called trophic cascade, proposes that the control comes from the trophic level above. In this case, predators control herbivores, which in turn control primary producers. So the idea of the top-down model is that basically you have your predators control the herbivores, and the herbivores control the vegetation, and the vegetation supplies the nutrients to the soil. So there's two different ideas about how this works. Probably the reality is the interaction between those two areas. Biomanipulation is used to improve water quality in polluted lakes. This actually happened. It's a very interesting phenomenon. In a Finnish lake, the blooms of cyanobacteria occurred when zooplankton were eaten by large populations of roach fish. So this fish, the removal of the roach fish, in addition to pike perch, controlled roach populations, allowing zooplankton populations to increase and ending cyanobacterial blooms. So let me give you a little background about this. So in the 70s, there was a wastewater spill that killed many of the fish in this lake in Finland. And when the lake came back on its own, it came back with these secondary consumers, but no tertiary or quaternary consumers. So it just had these fish that ate the zooplankton. Well, the fish ate the zooplankton, and they were very good at it. And the zooplankton would have eaten the cyanobacteria, the phytoplankton, but instead the phytoplankton grew out of control because there was no zooplankton, because the fish was the roach fish was eating the phytoplankton. So this caused the bloom in the cyanobacteria. Now, what these researchers did in Finland is they took they extracted as much of the roach fish out of the lake as they could. They went around and captured it with nets and tried to decimate the population as efficiently as possible. And then they also put in pike perch, which was a tertiary predator which was going to eat the roach fish. So because the pike perch ate the roach fish, it kept the roach fish population in check. So this was a top-down model of use of incorporated in biomanipulation. So because they put the pike perch in there and they reduced the roach fish, then they reestablished the balance of the system, and they had a good amount of zooplankton, and the zooplankton ate the phytoplankton, and they didn't have problems with the cyanobacterial blooms. Okay, so here's the example of that. Here's the fish. It was eating the zooplankton, which would eat the algae. In the polluted state, the fish became abundant, the zooplankton became rare, and therefore the algae became abundant. In the restored state, they reduced the populations of the fish. They put in other fish to prey upon it. the zooplankton became abundant, and the algae became rare. So you can see how that use of the top-down model was effective in this case of biomanipulation. Disturbance influences species diversity and composition. Decades ago, most ecologists favored the view that communities are in a state of equilibrium. This view was supported by F.E. Clements, who suggested that species in a climax community function as an integrated unit. Okay, Clements is a world-renowned ecologist, and he also had a lot of really grand ideas. Okay, so he thought that like a climax community, like that was the end of the community. It was always going to be like that. He didn't really consider disturbance as a factor. Other ecologists, including A.G. Tansley and H.A. Gleason, challenged whether communities were at equilibrium. Okay, so recent evidence of change has led to a non-equilibrium model, which describes communities as constantly changing after being buffeted by disturbances. A disturbance is an event that changes the community, removes organisms from it, or alters resource availability. So a disturbance could be like a big forest fire or a massive hurricane, or any sort of high energy event that's causing a shift in the ecosystem. Fire is a significant disturbance in most terrestrial ecosystems. A high level of disturbance is the result of high intensity and high frequency of disturbance. Low disturbance levels result from either low intensity or low frequency disturbance. The intermediate disturbance level hypothesis suggests that moderate levels of disturbance can foster greater diversity than either high or low levels of disturbance. High levels of disturbance exclude many slow-growing species. Low levels of disturbance allow dominant species to exclude less competitive species. Okay, so if you have a system that has lower levels of disturbance, you're going to get to have many slower growing species. Those systems that have low levels of disturbance they allow those dominant species to exclude less competitive species. So the more the less frequent the disturbance is, the more you're going to have particular dominant species. When you have frequent disturbances, you're going to have greater diversity. In New Zealand study, the richness of invertebrate taxa was highest in streams with an intermediate intensity of flooding. So here's the example. Researchers identified taxa of invertebrates at 2 locations in each of 27 New Zealand streams. They assessed the intensity of flooding at each location using an index of stream bed disturbance. The number of invertebrate taxa peaked where the intensity of flooding was at intermediate levels. So where the level of flooding was really high, that was detrimental to species diversity. It basically uprooted lots of different species. But where the in the index of disturbance intensity was moderate, that's where you had the highest level of species diversity. Number of taxa. These are different genera or species, different species in this given area. So with moderate disturbance, you have greater diversity. With low disturbance, you had dominance of particular species, and with high disturbance, you had the decrease of. With high disturbance, you had the removal of certain species. So it was around that sweet spot, the Goldilocks zone, that you get the highest diversity. The large-scale fire in Yellowstone National Park in 1988 demonstrated that communities can often respond very rapidly to massive disturbance. The Yellowstone forest is an example of a non-equilibrium community. A lot of western forests in particular are what we call fire adapted. Some even have species of trees like Douglas fir that are they actually require fire to help cause their seeds to what is the word I'm looking for? Anyway, they need fire in order to reproduce. Here's the environment in the Yellowstone National Forest, National Park. Right after the fire was just absolutely decimated. There's nothing growing, but you can see in the background here there are living trees. So a lot of times these disturbances occur in patchy frameworks. So you have living trees over here, and they may influence this patchy area in here. And then 1 year after the fire, this is you can tell it's not the same area here. This area was obviously affected much worse. But this area here, 1 year after the fire, these branches didn't get burned, so the fire must not have been as bad in this area. But it does show that the community began to recover. Herbaceous plants, different from those in the original forest, cover the ground. Okay, ecological succession is the sequence of the community and the ecosystem changes after a disturbance. Primary succession occurs where no soil exists when succession begins. That's the given characteristic of primary succession. It's like what happens when a volcano erupts from the ocean floor and becomes an island. That does happen. Or in on parts of Hawaii, for example, where there's a lot of there's a lot of volcanic lava that will cover the ground and kill off the other plants, and then there's no immediate soil. It requires typically lichens and mosses will be the first to colonize that area. And secondary succession begins when an area where the soil remains after a disturbance. So that would be an area like in this Yellowstone fire, which burnt off all the trees, but there still was soil underneath the ground, on the ground. That is secondary succession. Early arriving species and later arriving species may be linked in one of three processes. Early arrivals may facilitate the appearance of later species by making the environment favorable. Early species may inhabit the establishment of later species. Later species may tolerate conditions created by early species, but are neither helped nor hindered by them. Retreating glaciers provide a valuable field research opportunity for observing succession. Succession on the moraines of the Glacier Bay, Alaska, follows that a predictable pattern of change in vegetation and soil characteristics. The exposed moraine is colonized by pioneering plants including liverworts, mosses, fireweed, dryas, and willows. You can see primary succession if you just take a walk in the woods and you look for bare rock. You'll often see that rock is covered with lichen, or have lichen in the creases of it, and that lichen is breaking up the surface of the rock and turning it into a little bit of soil, which is becomes a location for the mosses. And the mosses move in, and they bring with them more vegetation, vegetational structure, and that when they die, they form an even deeper layer of soil on the surface of the rocks, and then you can even get ferns, and from the ferns you'll get ferns developing in those in that primary succession, and they'll go from ferns to some shrubs and bushes and those vascular plants. So you can see primary succession very readily in your own observation. Just take a walk in the woods. Okay, here's Glacier Bay, Alaska. There's the pioneer stage, 1941. These are just mineral deposits that are laid down by the glacier. So here's the glacier coming in, and then it's retreating. As it retreats, it leaves behind this pioneer stage. It's got little low-growing plants and what have you, and mosses and lichens. The driest stage, this is a low-growing shrubby plant which forms mats, and it grows all over that surface there. And the whole time it's growing up there, it's really building, it's laying down, putting down a layer of soil nutrients, and preparing for the next stage, which is the alder stage. The alder stage is more developed, like a light forest, and this is beginning to have deciduous trees here, and these deciduous trees will drop their leaves, and that leaves will become a part of the soil here. And so the community is building up from low amounts of soil to greater, deeper, and deeper amounts of soil until you get to the spruce stage, which is the greater. This is the larger forest here. So here's the glacier is basically retreating, and this is the oldest part here, the spruce stage, and the most recent part is up here, the pioneer stage, and then a little bit older is the driest stage, the alder stage, and the spruce stage. Okay, so you can see how this all happened as the glacier retreated throughout Great Glacier Bay. Here's the pioneer stage. Lots of little weedy plants growing on these rocky surfaces here. Here's the glacier as it retreats back up the mountain. About 3 decades, after about 3 decades, the driest, that low-growing shrub dominates the plant community. After a few decades later, the alder invades and forms dense thickets. And in the next 2 centuries, alder are overgrown by Sitka spruce, western hemlock, and mountain hemlock. Okay, this is in the spruce stage. This is the mature forest of that region. Succession is the result of changes induced by vegetation itself. On the glacial moraines, vegetation increases soil nitrogen content, facilitating colonization by later plant species. Okay, humans have the greatest impact on biological communities worldwide. Human disturbance to communities usually reduces species diversity. Trawling is a great example of this, where you take a big net and you trawl along the bottom of the ocean floor, and you catch lots of fish this way, but you disturb the ocean floor, and a lot of those ecosystems take a long time to restore. So here's the fish occurring in a untouched area of the ocean floor, and then here's a deep sea trawler came through with a big net, and you can see it just wrecked the whole system. It smashed it all down, and it'll take some time for this to restore itself. Okay, biogeographic factors affect community diversity. All right, latitude and area are 2 factors that affect community species diversity. These are we kind of know this intuitively from studying biomes recently. Species richness is especially great in the tropics and generally declines along an equatorial polar gradient. Two key factors in equatorial polar gradients of species richness are probably evolutionary history and climate. And, you know, but by climate, we mean sunlight. So you get a lot of sunlight, you get a lot of energy for plants. You get a lot of energy for plants. You have different plant diversity that can occur, you know, considering with the effect of moisture. And then you get high diversity. Temperate and polar communities have started over repeatedly following glaciations. So glaciers are a major function of even our ecosystem here. Believe it or not, the area that we are in right here in the coastal plain of Virginia, this was about 10,000 years ago. This was a spruce forest. So it was much more like the Alaskan habitat that we just looked at in that successional phase of Glacier Bay. And that's because there was a major glacial event about 12,000 years ago and receded. And about 10,000 years ago, we had spruce forests here. We know that from the record of pollen that has been captured in soil depositions throughout the region. So temperate and polar communities have started over repeatedly following glaciations. The greater age of tropical environments may account for their species richness. It's partly their greater age, and it's partly the fact that they've got a lot of sunlight and a lot of moisture. But in the tropics, the growing season is longer, so biological time runs faster. The climate is likely the primary cause of latitudinal gradient in biodiversity. Two main climatic factors correlated with biodiversity are sunlight and precipitation. They can be considered together by measuring a community's rate of evapotranspiration. Evapotranspiration is the evaporation of water from the soil plus the transpiration from plants. Basically what this means is the more plants you have and the more precipitation, the more evapotranspiration you have. And the more evapotranspiration indicates more robust ecosystem. So you're talking about, more plants when you have higher evapotranspiration. Here's our ground squirrel once again. Okay, so this is vertebrate species richness on the y-axis. On the x-axis is potential evapotranspiration. As evapotranspiration is greater, okay, you're getting like greater precipitation and greater vegetation. Then you're having increased in vertebrate species richness. This is just another way of looking at basically how productive the tropical rainforest is. So up here, where you have low potential evapotranspiration, that might be like the tundras, low vegetation, low growing vegetation, not a lot of evapotranspiration, and therefore low species richness. A vertebrate species richness in North America increases most predictably with the potential evapotranspiration, just expressed as rainfall equivalents. The species area curve quantifies the idea that all other factors being equal, the larger geographic area has more species. This basically ties into a phenomenon called island biogeography. So if you take, if you look at a small island like in the Hawaiian Islands, you may look at Midway, which is a coral atoll, which is associated with the Hawaiian island chain. It's a very small atoll, very small island. Compared to the big island of Hawaii, there's going to be greater biological diversity on the larger island and lower biological diversity on the smaller island. Species richness on islands depends on island size, distance from the mainland, immigration, and extinction. The equilibrium model of island biogeography maintains that species richness on an ecological island levels off at a dynamic equilibrium point. Studies of species richness on the Galapagos Islands support the prediction that species richness increases with island size. Okay, here's the Galapagos Island, famous Galapagos Island cactus. It's a very dry, arid habitat. Here's the number of plant species on the y-axis, and then the island size on the x-axis here. You can see as island size increases, the number of plant species also increases. And what can we say when number of plant species increases? We can also infer that number of vertebrate species increases as well. Number of animal species, invertebrates as well. Pathogens alter community structure locally and globally. So ecological communities are universally affected by pathogens, disease-causing organisms, and viruses. Pathogens have a way of affecting organisms when they're in density-related matters. So when the more dense the population is of a given animal, the more likely that the transmission of that disease is going to occur. And the more likely that transmission of that disease occurs, the faster it spreads, the greater it spreads, the more it affects that population. So it's almost like pathogens are sort of a method of population control from a strictly biological sense. Pathogens can have dramatic effects on community structure when they are introduced into new habitats. For example, coral reef communities are being decimated by white band disease. White band disease is a disease that affects elkhorn and staghorn corals, and it will get into this coral, and it will kill off large sections of the coral and leave other sections alive. But it will basically impair that coral for the future. Sudden oak death has killed millions of oaks that support many bird species. This is mostly common out in California and Oregon. It's a type of fungus that has an extremely detrimental effect on the native oaks that occur out there. And once those oaks die, then acorn woodpeckers and other birds that squirrels and whatnot that depend on these oaks are also being affected. Zoonotic pathogens have been transferred from other animals to humans. The transfer of pathogens can be direct or through an intermediate species called a vector. Many of today's emerging diseases are zoonotic. Okay, so this includes like avian flu, H1N15, avian flu. It could include Ebola, because Ebola is found in bats, and it went from bats to humans. And it's a pretty common way of pathogens go through an organism, and they transfer from that organism to humans. Identifying the community of hosts and vectors of pathogen can help prevent disease. For example, recent studies identified 2 species of shrew as the primary host of the pathogen for the Lyme disease. Okay, Lyme disease is a bacteria, Burgdorferi, Spirolia burgdorferi, and it's not necessarily fatal, but it does impair the individual that's affected with it. It causes like arthritis-like symptoms, so it can be very detrimental. There has been research on Lyme disease considering the white-footed mouse in upstate New York. There's a long-term study that's been going on 15 or 20 years up there. It's very detailed, and they publish papers every couple of years on it, and it's trying to understand the biology of the vectors, which are like these mice that are carrying the mice are carrying fleas and ticks, and the ticks carry the Lyme disease, and if the tick gets from the mouse to the human and bites the human, then it can cause Lyme disease. Avian flu is a highly contagious virus of birds. Ecologists are studying the potential spread of the virus from Asia to North America through migrating birds. Okay, my understanding is that mostly avian flu was transmitted through chickens, but I guess they're doing this additional research on birds, on wild birds. Okay, here's a graduate student who's putting a leg band on a gyrfalcon offspring hatchling in an effort to try to track avian flu throughout North America. Human activities are transporting pathogens around the world at unprecedented rates. Community ecology is needed to help study and combat pathogens. Okay, here we're going to go back into the chapter here. This is a study on page 849 where they took cane toads, which are they are an invasive exotic in Australia, and they tried to feed them to these black snakes, and the black snakes obviously preferred to eat the native frog. They ate 100 native frogs, and in areas where the cane toad and the snake coexisted, the snake avoided the cane toad. In areas where the cane toad and the snake were not living together, the cane toad was a novel approach to the snake. Then the snakes did try to eat some of the cane toads. Okay, this shows this is how recently the cane toad was in the area of the given black snake, and this is they were affected. They were injected. The snakes were injected with poison from the cane toad. The cane toad had a greatest effect in the least number of years. So basically, what we're saying here is that the snakes, once they understood what the cane toad was, they avoided the cane toad, and if they were biologically exposed to the cane toad, they had a greater resistance. So this is the swimming speed. This is an interesting study. If you want to look at it, it's page 849 on your textbook. It's worth a look, but it's a little confusing. Okay, here is a table of different symbiotic or interspecific interactions, including competition, predation, herbivory, symbiosis, parasitism, mutualism, commensalism, and facilitation. That's when species has positive effects on other species without any intimate contact, like that juncus, the black rush.